guys. Okay, welcome again to our biology lesson. Over here we'll be doing the biology paper 2-3 May June 2025. Alright, so this is a multiple choice paper that we'll discuss today. Okay, so let's see what the questions wanted. Okay, so question number 1 says the diagram shows an aquatic plant in light. What is the characteristic of all living things that is demonstrated in the diagram? Now, when you look at this diagram over here, we'll see that it's a plant in water, but then again, it's like light is getting into the test tube, alright? So it's kind of the plant uses that light. And then we have bubbles of oxygen kind of being produced from what? From the plant. Now, we need to know which characteristic uses light and produces oxygen in the characteristics of what? Of living things. So from the choices here we have breathing. Of course, with breathing, oxygen should be used. We have nutrition, which is the process in which plants make their, organisms get food. Alright, so nutrition in plants is definitely demonstrated by the process of photosynthesis, okay, where they can feed. And then we have respiration. So respiration is production of energy. Now, because we are talking of a characteristic of living things, photosynthesis is not a characteristic of living things. So instead, it will be nutrition, alright, which will involve use of oxygen, release of oxygen, using of what? Light, and in presence of what? Of water. So our choice here will be nutrition, okay? Yeah, then we go to number 2, which says the diagram shows 4 organisms. Which organism is a prokaryote? Now, we know that prokaryotes are organisms that do not have a nucleus. Instead, they just have a DNA lying in the cytoplasm of what? Of that particular organism. Now, when we look at the organisms that we've been given here in our question, we'll find that C, D, B all have what? Nucleus, we can see, around their genetic material, except for A. So A here would represent prokaryotes. Number 3 says, what happens when plant cells are placed in sugar solution that has lower water potential than the cytoplasm of the cell? So the solution has low water potential. It means the plant has more water than the what? Than the solution. So at the end of the day, water will keep getting out of the cell or moving from the cell by osmosis process into the what? Into the solution. Now, as it is losing more water, eventually the cell will become flaccid. Alright, so cell lose more water and becomes what? Flaccid. That will be our choice. Okay, number 4 says, in a DNA molecule over here, bonds, pairs between bases hold 2 strands together. High temperatures can break these bonds to form 2 single strands of DNA. The base pair C and G is held together the base pair C and G is held together more strongly than the base pair A and T. 2 DNA molecules containing the same number of bases were studied. We have in the molecule 1 we had 20% of bases being T, and in molecule 2 we have 20% of bases being C. Then the question says, which DNA molecule would require the lowest temperature to break in the single strand, to break into single strands? Now, we have seen here that base C and G are held together more strongly than base A and T. So it means C and G will require more temperature than A and T. But then again, in molecule A, we have 20% of T, and in molecule 2, we have 20% of what? Of C. Now, what we have to understand is that since we have 20% in molecule 1, since we have 20% of base T, T is usually paired to A, we will also have 20% of base what? Base A. So it's like T is 20%, so it means even A is how many? Is 20%. So 20 plus 20 will get 40%. Alright, so in this molecule A, it means we have 40% of base T and what? And base A. Then at the end of the day, it means we have 60%, the remaining will be 60, we have 60% of base C and G. Okay, then we go to molecule number 2. In molecule number 2, we have 20% of C. So if we have 20% of C is 20%, it means we also have G at what? At 20%. So total percent of C and G will again be what? 40%. Now, the remaining percent is for base A and base T. So base A and T will also exist at what? At 60%. Okay? Yeah. So the question goes again to be, in which DNA molecule would require lowest temperature to break the strands? Now we want the one that will only be broken by what? By lowest temperature. Okay, so DNA molecule A, because there are more A bases present in molecule A, no? In molecule 1 here we can see A and T are of the same amount, 20%, 20%, so 40%. In molecule 1, because there are more G bases present, well, if we have more G bases present, it means we are going to have high amount of temperature required to break the bond, because we have seen here C and G are held together more strongly, so breaking them will require more heat. In molecule 2, because there are more A bases present, this is correct. We have seen that in molecule 2, we have like C 20% and G 20%. So eventually at the end of the day, we only have 40% of those ones. While for AT, we have 60%. And of course, base A and T do not require a high amount of temperature as what? As base C and G require. Then this says in molecule 2, because there are more G bases present. Now G requires high temperature than what? Than C. So our choice here will be base C. Okay? Yeah. Then we move to question number 5. The diagram shows a process involving an enzyme in the human stomach. So we have enzymes over here. Okay, question 5 says the diagram shows a process of involving an enzyme in human stomach. So we have here enzyme plus substrate, and then we have our product. Okay, and then we also have here our enzyme plus this what? We have, at the end of the day, we have the enzyme plus two what? Products over here. Okay, so the diagram shows another process R that affects this enzyme. So process R, when it occurs, it affects the enzyme. You can see the active site of the enzyme has now changed. Which row identifies the substrate and the cause of process R? Alright, so which row identifies the substrate and the cause of process R? Okay, so we know that the substrate definitely has to fit into the active site. Okay, so if the active site is like that, it means the substrate has to have such a shape so that it can fit into what? Into the active site. So obvious, the substrate has to look like this one here. And then we are told that this is in the human stomach. So the human stomach is in acidic condition, alright? So in order for the enzyme to be affected or destroyed, the conditions should not be acidic anymore. So instead, they should be alkaline conditions. So from our choices here, we know the substrate should assume such a V-like shape, alright? V-like shape. And then for it to fit into the active site, and because the enzyme is being denatured in the stomach, then again this will not be what? Will not be an acidic condition, and instead it will be an alkaline condition. Alright, so we'll choose B over here. Number 6 says, what is the balanced chemical equation for photosynthesis? Now we know that photosynthesis is a process in which carbon dioxide, right? So carbon dioxide reacts with water, alright, to give us what? To give us glucose, which is C6H12O6 plus what? Plus oxygen. But it's 6 oxygen, we have 6 molecules of water and 6 carbon dioxide as well. So from there, the equation would be, from our choices, the equation would be C. Number 7 says, a potato was removed from a potato plant. A 5 gram cube of potato was cut and put into a beaker of distilled water. What is the most likely mass of the cube after 2 hours? Now, the potato cube is put in distilled water. The distilled water has high water potential than the potato cube. So at the end of the day, water will keep on moving into the potato cube by osmosis process, and as water is moving into the potato cube will gain mass or will gain more weight. So at the end of the day, we expect it to increase from 5 grams to something bigger than 5. And of course, from our choices here, it will be D, because the all others will indicate that the potato cube is losing water instead of gaining water. And for 5 here, it means for it to remain with 5 grams, the potato should be placed in a solution that has equal water potential to the potato. All right? Yeah. Number 8 says the diagram shows the direction of net movement of 2 substances across a human placenta. Okay, so across a human placenta. So if this is the placenta, it means this is the maternal blood over here, and this is the fetal blood. All right. Okay, which tissues represents maternal blood and is identified correctly? All right, which tissue is representing maternal blood and is identified correctly? So of course, tissue P is the maternal blood crossing the placenta into what? Into the fetal blood over here. All right, yeah. Okay, so the tissue is P is maternal blood. All right, yeah. And then what is the substance over there? Right, so substances here we have, let's start, maternal blood, substance carbon dioxide, then again we have P, which is maternal blood, substance 2, which is urea coming over here, getting out, and then we have tissue Q, which is not maternal blood, this is fetal blood, and tissue Q also is fetal blood again. But then again in tissue Q we have substance 1 getting in amino acid, could be correct, but then again it's what is that? Amino acid comes from the maternal blood into the fetal blood, and then tissue Q again starch. Now our question wants us to determine maternal blood and what we will find in the maternal blood. All right, so in the maternal blood is this side, and it will have some unwanted substances or waste from what? From the fetus. All right, so from there, one of the waste which we can get from the fetus is usually urea. All right, it's urea. So definitely tissue P will tissue representing maternal blood will be P, and substance that we can find in it is going to be what? Is going to be the urea. So we'll choose B over here. Number 9 says the diagram shows part of a cross section of a leaf. Which structure is the parasite mesophyll? All right, so part A over here, this one here represents cuticle of the cell. B represents the parasite cells. C over here represents the vascular bundle, and D over here usually represents what? The lower epidermis. So the parasite cells will definitely be B. Number 10 says a person has swollen, bleeding gums, and slow wound healing. This could be caused by lack of which nutrient in a diet. All right. So the lack of vitamin C is the one that results into bleeding of gum, something known as scurvy. Alright, so this person requires vitamin C. Number 11 says digested food molecules move into the cell of the body where they are used and become part of the cells. What is the definition? What is this a definition of? So the question is all about use. The process in which these nutrients are now being used is usually referred to as assimilation. Alright, so for here, the answer will be assimilation. Absorption is the movement of nutrients, alright, from the linings of the digestive system, let's say the small intestine, into the blood. But the use by the cells is definitely assimilation. Number 12 says, the diagram shows part of the human digestive system. In which part does protein digestion begin? So, protein digestion usually begins in the stomach. Hence, we have to identify stomach from this diagram, which is definitely this part over here. Number 13 says, the diagram shows a cross-section of a leaf, a root, and a stem. Okay, so you can see it over there. In which row do the numbers represent the xylem in leaf, the root, and the stem? Okay, so which one represents xylem? Correct number for xylem, alright? And correct number for what? For correct number for xylem in root, correct number for xylem in stem, and what? And in the leaf. Okay, so you have to know that the xylem is usually the inner part when we draw a what? A presentation of the vascular bundle. Which means that if you are drawing a root, for example, the xylem is inside while the phloem is outside. Okay? Let's start with the stem over here. This is the stem, alright, and this is representation of vascular bundle. So over here, this outer part over here is the phloem, but the inner part is what? Is xylem. When you go to the root, the outer part over here, this is the phloem, the inner part is xylem. And when you come to the leaf also, the outer part is phloem and the inner part is what? Is xylem. So for the leaf, it has to be 1. For the root, it has to be 4. And for the stem, it has to be 6. That is B. 1, 4, 6. Yes. So our answer here will be B. Number 14 says, which structures in humans and in plants normally carry amino acids? Alright. So in plants, amino acids are definitely carried in the phloem. But in humans, it is the arteries. Why arteries? Because arteries carry oxygen and nutrients and other stuff away from the heart to different parts of the body. Alright, so we'll go with A. Number 15 says, through which pathway does blood leave the heart? So blood leaves the heart through the arteries. Okay, so it goes from the arteries to the ventricles. Okay, then from the ventricles to other blood vessels. Alright, because always if I draw a rough presentation here, a rough box to represent chambers of the heart, the upper chambers are usually there should be atrias. The upper chambers are usually here atrias. This is the right atria, this is the left atria, this is the right ventricle, this is the left ventricle. So blood usually enters the atria, then from the atria it enters what? The ventricles. Alright? Yeah. Then from the ventricles it will go to all other parts of the body. Then through which pathway does blood leave the heart? So it will definitely go from the arteries to what? To the ventricles. Okay? Okay, the photomicrography shows some blood cells. Okay, so this diagram over here is actually representing some blood cells. Which row shows the name and the function of the cell labeled X? Now, cell labeled X is representing one type of white blood cells. This white blood cells is known as a phagocyte. Phagocyte appears to have a lobe-like nucleus. So this will be a phagocyte, while this one here will be a lymphocyte. Alright, so what does phagocyte do? Phagocyte engulfs pathogen, just like it is. It kind of engulfs the pathogen and then destroys it. So it will be C over there. Okay, we go to number 17. Which row shows the effect of cholera on the human body? Okay, so when there is cholera, the thing that will happen is chloride ions will move into the small intestine. Alright, while they move into the small intestine, it's the effect of the toxin that is produced by what? By this pathogen. So it will result into movement of chloride ions into the intestine. When chloride ions move into the intestine, the effect of chloride ions on water potential will result into the decrease of water potential inside the small intestine. Okay, so after there's a decrease in water potential inside the small intestine, water will be forced to enter into the small intestine from neighboring cells. Now, as it is entering, more water will be entering to lower the concentration of chloride ions or increase the water potential. But at the same time, this water is leaving the body through the what? The anus. So the description which is correct over here is row C. Number 18 says, the plotted points 1 and 2 on the graph show different types of structure in the breathing system of a human. Okay, so which row identifies the structure attached to an alveoli and a structure containing cartilage? Alright, so we can see here relative diameter of the lumen. We have part 1 x and part 2 x. Now we need to identify, and of course distance from the larynx. Alright, so we need to identify which one contains, which structure is attached to alveoli and which structure is attached to what? To cartilage. Alright, so structure attached to alveoli is going to be structure 2, while structure attached to cartilage is going to be structure 1. Why am I saying so? I'm using the relative diameter of lumen but also distance from the larynx. Alright, from the larynx, the part that is very closer to the larynx is the trachea and the bronchi and bronchus, like that. So these ones, and of course they are the ones that have cartilage. but the alveole is a bit distant from what? From where the larynx is, and of course it doesn't have cartilage. So of course structure attached to alveole will be 2, and structure containing cartilage will be what? Will be 1. Okay, number 19 says, which process in plant uses energy from respiration? Is it cell division, osmosis, photosynthesis, or transpiration? Transpiration does not require energy, alright? Yeah. Photosynthesis uses energy from the sunlight, energy from the sun. Osmosis does not use energy, but cell division usually uses what? Energy from respiration. Number 20 says, which sequence of statement explains the build-up and removal of oxygen depth? Alright, so we have the statements over here. Anaerobic respiration occurs in muscles during vigorous exercise. Faster and deeper breathing continues after exercise. Glucose is converted into lactic acid. Lactic acid builds up in muscles, causing an oxygen debt. Oxygen enables the continued aerobic respiration in lactic acid. So the first thing that is usually happening is that you have anaerobic respiration occurring. Okay, so after anaerobic respiration occurs, what is the next thing? Glucose will be converted into lactic acid because it is not completely broken down. Okay, then after it is converted into lactic acid, what is the next thing? The lactic acid will keep on increasing, and hence it will cause an oxygen debt. Then at the end of the day, we will still have a high breathing rate after exercises. Why? So that more oxygen enters into the body, and this oxygen is going to be used in aerobic respiration for complete breakdown of what? Of the lactic acid into carbon dioxide and water. So our statement should be, number 1 should remain as 1, number 3 should stand as 2, and then number 4 should stand as 3, which is A. Yeah. Okay, what is filtered out of the blood in the glomerulus and in the nephron? What is filtered out of blood in the glomerulus and in the nephron? Okay, so the things that are filtered out of blood in the glomerulus, one is glucose. Glucose is filtered out in the glomerulus. Alright, it's filtered out and can bypass into the proximal convoluted tubule. But also urea is filtered out in the glomerulus so that it can go into what? Into the nephron. So yes, glucose and urea are all filtered out. Number 22 says, what can be broken down to form urea? Okay, so urea is usually formed from the breakdown of amino acids. Alright, so amino acids are the ones that are broken down. Number 23 says, the diagram shows a simple reflex arc. So reflex arc is a path that is usually taken by a reflex action. Alright, now this path usually starts from a sensor neuron. Okay, then from the sensor neuron it goes to the relay neuron. From the relay neuron it goes to the motor neuron. And of course you'll find a lot of relay neurons centered in the what? Central nervous system. Okay. Yeah, so what are the names of the structures labeled P, Q, and R? Alright, so P is connected to the receptor over here. So this is going to be the sensor neuron. And then here in the spinal cord, we will find a lot of relay neurons. So Q should be relay neuron. And then after that, relay neuron is kind of connecting the sensor neuron to the motor neuron. So the other part, which is R, should be motor neuron. And that is choice D, sensor neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron. Yeah, so D. Okay. Number 24 says, the diagram shows a cross-section of a human eye. Okay, which row is correct when a person views a near object? So when a person is viewing a near object, this one here has to become thick. This one here has to loosen. Okay, and then this one here has to contract or tighten. Okay, so yeah, E will contract. After it contracts, F will become thick. Okay, F will become thick, and then the suspensor ligaments will be pulled less, and more refraction will take part. So more light is allowed to do what? More light is allowed to enter the eye. So here we'll go with B. Then number 25 says, which hormones increase blood glucose concentration in humans? So we have two hormones. We have glucagon hormone. Glucagon hormone usually increases glucose by stimulating conversion of glycogen into glucose in the liver, okay, when there is low blood glucose concentration. But adrenaline hormone also increases blood glucose, especially when someone is preparing to fight or flight. You will need some energy, alright? So more glucose is needed so that it can be broken down to give you energy for fight or flight. So for 25, it will be A. Number 26 says, a shoot tip was placed on an agar block. Substances can diffuse through agar. Light was shown on the shoot tip from one direction, okay? So from one direction, direction Y, going to X. After 3 days, the agar was cut in half to form blocks X and Y. Block X and Y were placed on the stem of shoots that had the tips cut off. The agar blocks were kept on the shoot stems for 1 week. Which set of shoots represent the result after 1 week? Now, we can see that from this side here, the part Y or agar Y received enough light. Okay, so if it received enough light, it means we have uniform distribution of what? We have uniform distribution of what? Auxin, enzyme, auxin hormone from the tip of the what? Of the plant. But this one here, X, it will be concentrated on one side, you know. It will be concentrated on one side because it kind of goes away. So if we place them on the plant, what do we expect to see? Okay, so for Y, there was like uniform distribution or lateral distribution. For X, it was kind of accumulated on one side. So from there, the one that has uniform distribution, you see, the source of light is here. So the distribution of light or the auxin will be concentrated in one angle over here, away from light. And hence, they will facilitate bending towards light like this way. Oh. Bending towards light like this way. So for X, you expect it to grow this way, but for Y, there's uniform distribution, so it will keep on growing tall. So from there, we can choose C is our answer. Number 27 says, the diagram shows reproduction of a potato plant. Potato X was planted into the ground, and a plant grew from it. The plant then produced potato Y. Okay, so we have potato Y over here, but this one was the one that was planted earlier. Which statement is correct? X and Y are genetically different. Y was produced by asexual reproduction. Y was produced by sexual reproduction. Y was produced by fusion of gametes. So from here, it is that X and Y are supposed to be genetically the same or identical. Alright, because this is asexual reproduction. So X and Y are genetically identical. Y is reproduced by asexual reproduction, that is correct. Y is not produced by sexual reproduction, this is wrong. And also because it's not sexual reproduction, it will not have fusion of gametes. So our choice here is going to be B. Number 28 says, which statement about pollination is correct? Self-pollination increases ability of population to respond to changes in environment by increasing variation. No. Self-pollination decreases variation. Self-pollination increases the ability of a plant to respond to changes by reducing variation. So if we are reducing variation, it means we are also decreasing the ability to respond to changes. Self-pollination reduces the ability of a population to respond to changes in the environment by increasing variation. It does reduce ability, but because it reduces variation also. Self-pollination reduces ability of a population to respond to changes in environment by reducing variation. Yeah, so it is D. Okay, we go to number 29. The graph shows changes in thickness of lining of a uterus wall during menstrual cycle. We have the thickness of the uterus over here, and we have the menstrual days of the menstrual cycle. Which day is the last? What is the last day of the menstruation? Is it 4, 8, 16, or 20? Alright, so when we come here, we see that at day 7, it's kind of a point at which the uterus wall is beginning to do what? To increase. So it can't be 7. It can't be 7, it can't be 8 either. 16, obvious, the uterus wall is thickening as well. to go further. So obvious, the last day should have been day 4. Number 30 says, which name is given to a different version of a gene? This is an allele. Okay, an allele is a different version of a gene. Okay, the diagram shows the cells of a mammalian embryo shortly after fertilization. What is the correct description of these cells? Okay. So, shortly after fertilization, the zygote is one example of a stem cell. But what is happening to it? Because after fertilization, it will keep on increasing in size till it forms an embryo, till it forms a fetus. Alright, so it is a stem cell, and what it's undergoing will be mitosis. Alright, so that it can increase in what? In number. So, this will be C, stem cells undergoing mitosis. Number 32 says, the diagram shows the inheritance in one family of a sex-linked, which means it's carried in a certain sex or expressed very much in one sex, recessive disease. Alright, so when you look over here, we can see that the shaded ones represent affected female and affected males, but the unshaded one, it means they have no affection. Now, when you start with parent 1 and 2, they all appear to be normal, but of their offsprings, the female offspring is fine, but the male offspring is having this linked disease. The same goes to here. This person 3 and the partner over here have children. Other children appear normal, but one of the female children appears to be having the disease. Now, which individuals in the diagrams are heterozygous for the disease? They carry the disease, but it actually does not show. These individuals have to be females. Okay, so females will carry the disease, and yet they'll appear to be what? To be normal. Okay, they won't show that they have the disease. Alright, so at the end of the day, you have the XY, you have XY from the males, and you have XX from what? From the females. So if the male gives a Y chromosome, and this Y chromosome meets a female who has that particular disease, let's say color blindness, the genotype will be XCY. This is a male with color blindness. Alright, but if the female is, heterozygous, and of course maybe the normal X allele, X capital CY, this male will have a normal color vision. But if it appears that the recessive allele is the one that is expressed, then they'll be affected with what? With the disease. That's why we say the female is heterozygous for the disease. So it will be individual number 2 and individual number 3. Number 33 says, which row shows this describes continuous and discontinuous variation? Continuous variation, body mass in animals is an example. Discontinuous variation is caused by genes and environmental factors. That is A. B. Continuous variation is caused by genes and environmental factors. Discontinuous variation is like seed shapes in peas is an example. Continuous variation is caused by genes only. Discontinuous variation ABO, blood group, is an example. D says seed color in peas is an example of continuous variation. Discontinuous variation is caused by what? By genes only. Now, continuous variation is caused by both genetic and environmental factors, while discontinuous variation is usually caused only by genetic what? Factors. Alright? Yes. So here, continuous variation is caused by genetic and environmental factors. Examples of continuous variation are like height, weight, like that. Examples of discontinuous variation are like ABO, blood group, and seed shape. Okay? Alright. So from here, we can say that continuous variation is caused by genes and environment, but also a good example of discontinuous variation is what? Is the seed shape. So we'll take B. Number 34 says, which statement describes an adaptive feature in an organism? So adaptive features, these are inherited features that enable an organism to survive and reproduce in its environment. Inherited features that allow organism to survive and reproduce in what? In its environment. So it is 1 and 3. Number 35 says, the graph shows the change in percent of bacteria resistant to what? Antibiotic X. What causes the change shown in the graph? What causes the change for the percent of bacteria resistant with time? Okay, Is it artificial selection? Artificial selection is based on someone's choice, man's choice. They cannot determine about a bacteria. Natural selection, yes, because mutation and stuff like that are occurring, so they are all changing their genes, and with time they kind of increase in number. Meiosis, this is a factor which can result to natural selection or can result into mutation. We have random fertilization, a factor that can result into mutation as well. So natural selection is the one that is favoring the increase of bacteria that are resistant to this antibiotic with time. So it will be B. 36 says, the diagram shows the flow of energy in units of energy through a food chain. Producers were 1,000, primary consumers 100, secondary consumers 10, tertiary consumers 1. Which percent of energy is lost between producers and so between producers and secondary consumers here, producers and secondary consumers. So to get the percent, it means to be 1,000 units minus 10 units over 1,000 units. Then the answer will multiply it to 100. So 1,000, like this, 1,000 minus 10, right? This will give us a 0. Here it will be 10, then we get 9. Then here again it will be 9. So it's like 990 over 1,000. Alright? Then the answer that we get over here will multiply it to 100. Okay, so when you work out that one, when you work it out, you get 99%. So our choice here will be D, which is 99%. Number 37 says, which process in nitrogen cycle can be caused by lightning and bacteria? This process is nitrogen fixation. Okay, nitrogen fixation is the process in which atmospheric nitrogen is converted into nitrates, and it can be done by lightning and and nitrogen fixing bacteria. So it is D. Number 38 says, which phase in population growth curve shows when death rates are higher than birth rate? So when we have higher death rate than birth rate, means a population is now declining or decreasing, and of course that is D. Number 38 says, what is a disadvantage of large-scale monocultures on crop plants? So when we have a large monoculture, it means you are growing a certain kind of crop, maybe maize plant only in a very large piece of land. Okay, so what is the effect? Decrease in use of insecticide, decrease in fossil fuel emission, an increase in biodiversity, an increase in risk of disease in destroying an entire crop. Increase in risk of disease in destroying an entire crop is very high because there is no variation over here. So when good bacteria come or good pathogens come, they can eventually wipe out. So D. Some processes involved in production of human insulin by genetic modification are listed. We have insertion of human insulin gene into a cat bacterial plasmid. Bacteria containing recombinant plasmids multiply and make human insulin. Human insulin gene DNA is isolated by restriction enzyme. Recombinant plasmids are inserted into bacteria. Alright, so the first thing that is happening over here is that human gene is isolated by using enzyme, restriction enzyme. That is the first thing that is done. Okay, after that thing has been done, this human gene is going to be inserted into a bacterial plasmid. Alright, after it is inserted into a bacterial plasmid, what does it form? It forms a recombinant DNA. So recombinant DNA would then be inserted, this is number 3, would then be inserted into bacteria, okay, so that they can multiply and make more human insulin. So the first point has to be 3 C or D. Then the second point has to be 1. So obvious it is C in our case. Yeah, so that was the last question for this paper. Thank you.